The 2024 Emilia Romagna Grand Prix is over with, and it's time to talk about Imola. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. We're here to talk about the Imola Grand Prix, a weekend I think a lot of us were really excited for. Obviously, with the 2023 Imola Grand Prix being canceled, I think everyone was very excited to get back to Imola, racing around, albeit I realize now is a very tight technical track here in the hillside country of Italy. It was a race of all time, I will say, but those last few laps definitely left a lot of us very, very much buzzing about this one. We saw a lot of really good races run by some very, very interesting parties. We saw a battle-ish for the lead coming down to the wire, and if there had been a few more laps, we might have seen some fireworks if we had ever been so lucky. But we're going to get there all in due time. Let's go ahead and get this thing kicked off with our weekend quick hits. We'll kick things off right at the front and right where we ended the weekend. That is a Max Verstappen win once again. Max took pole once again, completing his sweep of pole positions here in 2024. It did take a mighty toe from Nico Hülkenberg to get that pole position, but at the end of the day, he did exactly what he needed to do to put that Red Bull on the front row and to start at the front, as Will Buxton might say, that you definitely want to qualify in front because then you have every other car behind you, and that's exactly what we saw. Max leading the majority of the race. After all the pit stops had shaken out, he was still there. And while it did get very dicey there at the end with Lando Norris, he did come home to win once again after Lando was able to take the win into Miami. Max bounces back with another win, his second win of the weekend, obviously with his famously taking part in the iRacing 24 Hours of the Nürburgring. So it was a big weekend for Max, and I think it was a big weekend for the hope and prayer of an exciting 2024 F1 season from here on. We saw McLaren and Lando Norris look very strong in this one. In this weekend, we saw Ferrari bring upgrades and look particularly good in practice. Obviously, I think Ferrari couldn't really put it together in terms of the results on qualifying on Saturday and then in the race, but at the same time, they do look very particularly strong. And I think the gap to Red Bull looks, at least, a lot smaller than it was when we got this season started. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. But unfortunately, it does mean Max atop the P1 step on the podium once again. I do want to give a couple of shout outs to some drivers from teams further down the grid rather than the top. We saw a fantastic race, I think, from Yuki Tsunoda. Yuki ran an absolutely wonderful day, making his way up and finishing inside the points once again. Yuki has been on an absolute warpath when it comes to getting great results, and he is only getting stronger as the season goes on. You can really tell that step that he's taken and really dominating that midfield. I believe I saw that he is in P10 in the drivers rather, and even ahead of a driver like Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin. Yuki, you are killing it. Keep it up. We're excited for you. Another, I think, pair that had a pretty strong weekend overall was Haas. Not saying that only as a Haas fan, but also just what we saw. We saw Nico Hülkenberg take part in basically his first weekend ever around Imola. He has never raced Imola before this past weekend, and he ended up just outside the points in P11. But we did see Kevin Magnussen make his way forward from P18 all the way up until P12. If Kevin hadn't been impeded by Oscar Piastri in Q1, and he makes it into Q2 and runs that same race, points may have been on the cards. I, for one, wish we could have had that version of the multiverse, but unfortunately, it's still a very strong weekend for Haas P11 and P12, and while it didn't yield points, I do think it's a very strong result and definitely goes to show that we're taking steps in the right direction. So good job, guys. Keep it up. I would love to be fighting RB for points every weekend. I would make my heart so happy. I think Albon and Alonso have a weekend to forget. Alex, obviously, unfortunately, the victim of not having a tire put on correctly, wasn't able to get it secure, and he had to limp his way around, eventually making his way back into the pits once again, effectively going a lap down at that moment. And then I think he ended up making 4 or 5 pit stops over the course of the race, and then eventually just retired from the race once it was all said and done. It's really unfortunate for Alex and Williams, who continue just to be the most unlucky that I think I've ever seen a team. I mean, I don't know how how much worse they could realistically get. On the other side of the Williams garage, I actually think Logan had a very decent race. He made a couple of good moves. He didn't obviously make any major mistakes, causing no damage himself. And while Alex's damage and issues weren't his own fault, at least we saw Logan have a fairly decent weekend. And I mean, I think we're seeing that Williams car isn't as good as a lot of us wanted it to be at the beginning of the year. And I think if you look at it through that lens, I think we can see that we wish it was, but I think Logan had a very good weekend. So good job, Logan. Oh, let's see what else happened in this one. We saw Alpine kind of take a step back like we thought they might. Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly finishing, in the mid-teens appropriately. And then obviously Kick Sauber were basically nowhere to be found at the same time. I think to wrap up this race weekend, I do think it was a very middle of the road race up until these last 10 or so laps. Lando obviously charging back up, charging forward and trying to catch Max there towards the end of the race was very exciting. He did end up finishing less than a second away, so if there'd only been a few more laps, who knows what we might have seen. But other than that, we saw some pretty decent racing in the midfield with Yuki Tsunoda and Nico Hülkenberg. Kevin Magnussen obviously making his way up until P12. And at the end of the day, sometimes that's what you're going to get. It'll be an interesting wait until the next time out as we head to Monaco. So let's go ahead. Let's talk about our weekend winners and losers. I believe the weekend winner, funnily enough, is actually Max Verstappen. In a weekend leading all the way up to qualifying where for the first time in a long time, we saw Red Bull had looked like they were on the back foot leading up to qualifying in the race. Ultimately, it obviously ended up not mattering at all because he still ended up putting it on pole and winning the race. But I do think it warrants the biggest winner. I mean, we saw Lando have tremendous pace there at the end of his stint. And if Max hadn't been able to pull out a qualifying result, I dare say Lando might have ran away with this one, similar to how Max did. How Max ended up doing it. And so I do think the biggest winner actually is Max Verstappen. He found a way to get on pole in qualifying thanks to Nico Hülkenberg and found enough in the car with clear air and all that to still hold out enough of a gap to take the win. So I don't think this is going to happen a lot, but I do think Max Verstappen might be the weekend's biggest winner. But I do want to give a special shout out to Yuki Tsunoda and Kevin Magnussen. Yuki finishing in the points once again and driving a brilliant race, fighting up into those last couple of points paying spots. And then Kevin Magnussen charging up to P12 as well on around a track that you really don't see a lot of overtaking as such. So very, very well done, guys. You definitely are worth a mention. Moving on to our weekend loser. I do think our weekend loser is Fernando Alonso. Like I mentioned, a definite weekend to forget for Fernando. He definitely looked a little bit off all weekend. And I think the culmination of him starting in the pit lane and then finishing P19 just really caps it off. He looked like, for the first time in a while, just not like his usual self. Stroll beat him in both major sessions in this one, and it was just a definite weekend to forget. Hopefully he's able to get back to his ways next time out around Monaco, but definitely a weekend to forget for Fernando. Unfortunately, that means you're my weekend loser. All right, let's move on to reviewing our predictions that we made prior to the weekend beginning. We'll kick things off with my pick for biggest positive surprise. I went with Oscar Piastri, and we were so close to getting this. We saw Oscar out-qualify Lando and put it on the front row, unfortunately, before his impeding penalty knocked him back into P5. He finished the race in P4. I do wonder what would have happened if he hadn't gotten that penalty, but at the same time, he definitely impeded Kevin Magnussen and probably deserved the penalty he got. So I was very close to just giving myself this one anyway, but when it's all said and done, I couldn't do it. So no points for me there, unfortunately. Moving on to my pick for biggest disappointment, I went with Esteban Ocon. I assumed that Alpine was going to take a step back after their success in Miami, and I was right, but Esteban still ended up finishing P14 and ahead of his teammate, and so I don't think it was enough to give myself a point for that either. Moving on to my qualifying top three. Let me just take a moment here. My predictions were a Max Verstappen pole position, a Charles Leclerc P3, and a Lando Norris P2. That is 3 for 3. I believe our first perfect qualifying prediction. 3 for 3. We take that every single day of the week, so we are now sitting on 3 points as of now. Moving on to our race podium, I had a Max Verstappen win. That's the point. I did have Charles Leclerc come home finishing P2, so that is only a half point because he ended up finishing P3. And then I had Oscar Piastri finishing on the podium in P3, and unfortunately he finished just off the podium, but nonetheless that's no points. So we now sit on 4.5 points. And then lastly, I had my one crazy prediction. I thought with Crofty being out, we might have had a moment where the announcers make some uncharacteristic calls, and I thought we might hear about the rumor that had circulated about Kimi Antonelli to Williams, especially with F2 also there this weekend. We might have heard it, but unfortunately I didn't hear it in the F1 broadcast. If you did hear it and I missed it, please let me know in the comment section down below. But when it's all said and done, we end up taking home 4.5 points this weekend. A very, very good result for us. And when it's all said and done, here is where our points currently sit after the race weekend. I currently now sit on 28.5 points. British and Sinnel tied behind with 27.5 points each. And then we have F1 Inferno with 12.5. And then Andrew with 7.5 as well, although both of them joined late. So we're definitely taking the lead by a single point here in our little mini championship amongst the community. And as always, if you're interested in joining our little competition, hit the Discord in the link down below. Every week leading up to a Grand Prix, I'll make a call for predictions, and you can enter them into the channel, and you'll be entered into our little contest. So if you're interested, head in the link down below. So guys, that only leaves the question of what's next in Formula One, and that's right, it's the crown jewel of them all. The streets of Monte Carlo as F1 heads to Monaco 1 week from now in May 24th to 26th. Last year, we saw a Max Verstappen, Fernando Alonso, Esteban Ocon podium. A very good, surprising with Esti Besti back on the podium once again. But the only question left is who will we see this week? I am very, very excited. Qualifying in Monaco is as elite as it gets, even if the race is a little iffy here or there. Although last year we did see some excitement with the freak rainstorm that appeared out of nowhere, causing carnage up and down the grid. But I'm so excited. I think qualifying is going to be insane, and I cannot wait to see every single minute of it. But guys, that is going to wrap up my video here. What did you think of the Imola Grand Prix? Let me know down in the comment section below. And if you haven't already and you've made it this far into the video, give the video a thumbs up. It really helps me out. And if you're interested, subscribe down below if you haven't already. I upload a lot of F1 content as well as sim racing content on iRacing and other sims as well. But I hope you enjoyed the Imola Grand Prix. I hope you enjoyed the video. And it's only a week away until we hit Monaco. But nonetheless, that's going to wrap it up for me here, guys. And I'll see you in the next one.